Off the ball. This is News Talk.
You're very welcome along to Monday Nights Off the Ball. It's Richie McCormack here with you right through until 10 p.m. tonight. We wanted to start in such a sombre tone because obviously we have a World Cup exit in the quarter-final stage to talk about, but instead we ended up having a moment of levity just before we came on air. So if we sound like we're smilier than we should be if we're talking about such a serious act as Ireland going out of the World Cup, then it's because Dan was being asked to check his mic just before we went to air, and that manifested itself in you doing the talkie hand sign.
That's because I was given the talkie hand sign from Shane, who basically, out back, he just sort of shouted, Dan, and then he just started doing this. And I was like, well, I'll obviously just return that greeting back to him. And that's exactly what happened. So you lost the run of yourself. It wasn't actually that amusing at all. But
did you ever have one of those moments where you're just gone?
Yeah, you just lost yourself.
Even if it's like it's not that funny, you're just completely worn down.
It's like in school or something where you find something unnaturally funny. Or a funeral. I mean, this is a funeral.
It is technically.
I wore black.
We're here to remember Irish rugby, which sadly passed away on Saturday. Led a long and healthy life, but now unfortunately is no longer with us.
No.
How's private?
Had a good run.
Private. Donations in lieu of flowers.
Yeah.
Ben Finnegan joins us in the studio, we should mention as well. Dan McDonnell, soccer correspondent from the Irish Independent. We'll get into it because you're delighted, Dan, that Ireland's Rugby World Cup exploits are over.
Not delighted.
I was thinking about this.
Enjoyed Owen's coverage.
Good. We all did.
I'll miss Owen's coverage.
I wonder, can you just go out interviewing random drunks?
That is his thing now, to be honest. I think he's just the Vox Pop guy. You know, elections, whatever it might be. This is Owen's gig.
He has to go around and start talking to drunk people. Just from viewing it through soccer eyes, it is. We're going to pick through why Ireland lost as best we can and discuss that. Keith Wood's going to be joining us after 7:30, and Matty Williams as well after 8:00, which we streamed earlier on YouTube. But it's this kind of crisis that we're used to in football, we're not used to in rugby. It almost seems like it's alien to try and deal, because apropos of nothing, we were talking about the Staunton regime outside with Enda, and we're gone through some of the lowlights of that, and we're now into that, but with a rather good side.
Staunton was my first campaign covering the Irish team away. Actually, I saw there was a piece last week.
Hunty was talking about it.
It was on the AM show, and it was like a retrospective, and it was in hindsight, maybe results weren't that bad, I think, or something along those lines. But actually, that was a chaotic couple of years. That was the time when you had, I think it was the Sun sent someone dressed as Miss Piggy out to the Ireland training ground and ended up shaking hands with a slightly bemused Damien Duff, because it was a time that Staunton was described as a Muppet, as far as I recall.
Yeah.
And then it became like a Kermit the Frog themed thing, and then for some reason Miss Piggy, there was a reporter sent out dressed up as Miss Piggy to the ground. So that was where we went during that campaign, and that was an extreme level of criticism and scrutiny. And I was a part of it, I guess. So I can't take a step back and go, "Oh, wasn't it terrible?" It was you
were there with knives drawn,
quite vicious at times. I mean, you think Ireland lost 5-2 in Cyprus, and I think Paddy Kenny, Clinton Morrison, and Andy O'Brien never played for Ireland again after that game. So that was a pretty brutal fallout and a very fraught period with Stephen Ireland and other things thrown into the mix.
There was a lot, we were discussing outside, there was a lot thrown into that span that Stan was in charge of. There's a lot
Bobby Robson on Liveline was another.
Robson, I was trying to recall this. He was thrown into a post-match press conference. I think it was at home to Slovakia maybe, where he was clearly unwell. And it was known that Bobby wasn't well, and he was put into this situation whereby he was being asked to publicly defend Steve Staunton to a room full of journalists who just had it by then.
I can't quite recall that specific. I remember Bobby being rolled out a couple of times. I mean, there was a tour of America which was slightly chaotic in its own way.
Joey Lapira.
The Joey Lapira time. It was pretty brutal, and there would have been a lot of attention centred on, say, that was the first time that John Delaney would have been the subject of, say, chants, and it all managed to flip around and ended up very much falling on the management rather than the people that appointed them. And it was pretty vicious, and I don't think there's probably been a fallout like that period probably in another sport as such. People can tell me about, the Irish Rugby World Cup in 2007 was pretty brutal as well, but I'm not sure if it ever went down that particular road to the extent that things probably became a lot more personalised during that Staunton era. Because there is that broader debate about the treatment that the various teams receive, and it obviously rages.
It's a nonsense though, because it was our own Neil Tracy pointed it out. Like, he was doing the pay-per-view yesterday on the show, and he had a snapshot of the front pages that they were, and obviously they would go into further depth in the pieces and all that, but none of them were forgiving what had gone down from an Irish perspective over in Japan.
I don't think that was ever the accusation, though. I think that I saw those
from the general public, you get that sense that the rugby team aren't subject to the same scrutiny or level of criticism as others are.
But that's possibly true. But I think that is probably drawn from the. I'm at this point as people were having a debate in the Indo office, even just chatting about it today. That, like, you know, that sometimes that can be shaped by the TV studio as well. Like, you know, and I know that we've had some extreme punditry in the Irish on the Irish football team in the RTE studio. I mean, we've had players called brain dead. We've had players called out for the cars they drive and whatever it might be, and that has shaped a tone of a certain coverage, and that stuff would be mimicked and repeated by people, and there has been no equivalent of that in rugby, to be fair. And I'm not saying that that's just something that you crave. That's what we need to have. There are those perception comes from.
Well, there are those that will point out that there was one particular pundit, let's say, who was very much cast in that mould of agitator, who you know, isn't on TV anymore.
So that was vicious, though. Like, there was some stuff there that I think, I'm not saying that people want that, more of that as a blood sport type thing. I think that's not the case.
But what? Because I was thinking about this, like, when we were over in Geneva last week. I was flicking through the channels. Like, I was in one of those rooms where you have, like, basically 5 channels, 10 channels from every neighbouring territory, essentially. And I was looking for the Germany games. Germany were playing, oh God, I can't remember, was it Belarus maybe? And
Estonia maybe, was it?
It was Estonia, sorry, you're right, yeah. And it struck me that there was they had Jurgen Klinsmann before match, just a brief kind of talking head before he went off and collected $4.5 million a year from Ecuador. Did a brief talking head with Jurgen in the tunnel, and then the halftime was all ads, and full time there was very little analysis. It's the same in France. I know this when they're doing big games, is that especially in around the World Cup as well. There's no halftime, no full time. The debate is set by the studio.
But the debate is the most enjoyable thing about Irish soccer, because surely watching it isn't that enjoyable, as we saw last week.
Is it though?
I enjoy the debate around it, and the week build up and the few days afterwards, and the questions being asked.
But why is it, like, I know you're saying that we mightn't necessarily compare in terms of quality of teams, but why is it a thing here and it's not in, like, it's basically a UK and Ireland thing as far as I can see?
I think it's because the style of football that we play.
No, I think people love, like, I mean, I think, this is a slightly different thing. I mean, a lot of people got amusement out of Roy Keane's contribution to Liverpool and Manchester United yesterday. Yeah. A lot of people in the Premier League in recent years, Neville and Carragher, have become nearly bigger stars as pundits than they were as footballers. So that's like a general theme. And like around, but I think the broader thing is that pretty much the extremes of coverage around the football team during my time covering it anyway, is that pretty much every couple of games there would be a massive state of the nation debate. Like, there would be a bad result in a particular game, and that would broaden into like a general theory and analysis of what's going wrong with the game in this country, which was often needed.
But the reality of it is, going back to 2007, and I'm firmly, putting the blame of all this upon your doorstep, Dan, that we haven't been that great during that span. Whereas you can't say that about the rugby team, and especially during the last few years, is that we actually have been decent. So the level of criticism that might come now, I don't think is a vicious thing. It's more a case of trying to explain or trying to find an answer as to why things have gone so bad.
But it depends. Like, where's your line? Where's your bar for criticism? Is your criticism the players aren't very good, they're doing all they can, or a team that's blatantly underperformed? A team that's underperformed as professional athletes is probably. But I mean, like, I think that in response to some of it today, said, well, just don't forget the great service that people have given over the last couple of years and what they've won. But there's that's fine, but there also has to be a cold analysis of what has happened.
The two things can be true.
Yeah, of course they can.
Yeah.
Is it not more of a case that Joe Schmidt was found out?
Found out is probably a bit. Like, it's terms like found out is probably a bit of an extremism. Like terms like spoofer and stuff like that. Like you might hear.
I'm not saying he's a spoofer. No, like last year, I'm just saying number one.
In those terms, like you don't go through 2018 unbeaten being a bad coach and being a limited coach. Like, there is a certain deal of something about you.
My point is,
it's the failure to progress from that as the issue.
Exactly. Like, he was found out 12 months later that he wasn't able. He peaked too soon before the World Cup.
If you had to describe him in a Muppet town, how would you go?
I don't know which one would he be. I'm not enough for knowledge. I don't have enough knowledge of either the Muppets or rugby. But
oh, really?
No.
Why is your Muppet knowledge limited?
Limited enough, yeah.
Does it not Sesame Street household growing up?
I was watching the football, I think, around the time, you know.
Again, the two things can be true, right?
You can be one or the other. But I don't like. I can't follow up Ben's point. I don't know enough about whether they dramatically underperformed or not. But I think you have to expect a backlash to something like this. Like, as someone who's on the outside, who has heard a lot of chat about after 4 years, and I read Rory O'Connor's piece in the paper today, and I thought it was really good, actually, critical piece, pointing out quite sort of in detail how all the talk over the last 4 years, all the selections, all the decisions, even down to the detail of how many minutes players played for their provinces, it was all controlled with this in mind. So when you get to this in mind and you perform really badly, then you have to accept that people are going to say that you've performed really badly. And yeah, the criticism will sometimes be harsh, but that's because people care. You know, that is... you don't want to get to the point where people don't care. There's a sensitivity about, well, you can't criticise them because they've done a lot for the country over the last. They judge themselves by, if they have any standards of their own, they'll know that this is what comes with the territory. Yeah. Again, they're well-paid professional athletes. This is what comes with the territory with that. 53106, if you want to get in contact via text, and a lot of you have already. It was a disappointing World Cup for Ireland. Ireland went there to win a World Cup, not to get to a quarter-final. Why are so many Irish fans saying how well they did? We lost. Sport is about winning. Why do Irish people accept failure? That's from you, John in Dublin. No, you are comparing apples and oranges. The public expect far too much from the soccer team considering their ability, and they consistently overachieve. The rugby people seem happy with chronic underachieving by the rugby team, and they always bottle it. I don't think always bottling it is necessarily true, and this separating of rugby people, GA people and soccer people, I'm not going to say it is going to stop because I say this, but it has to stop because it's nonsense. It exists, though. It does exist. Like, there's two debates. Like, there's a debate over whether that should be the case, but there are people out there who do have strong feelings for whatever reason, going in whatever direction towards whatever sport. Like, there were people who were very largely indifferent to what happened over the weekend. Like, they do exist, you know. They definitely are out there. But they're not as much of a minority as people might think. By being vocally indifferent, you're no longer indifferent. No, I know what you're saying. That's a fair point. Being negative. A lot of people have been very silent about it, but they also exist. A lot of people could be silent about how Ireland performed at the World Athletics Championships a fortnight ago in Doha. Like, a lot of people would have been oblivious to it, and that's fine. You don't hear people going, I'm delighted Ciara McGeehan came fifth in the 1500 metres final. Screw the Irish Athletics team. That's a bit odd to me, that level of stuff that's thrown towards the rugby team, but I guess we'll get to it throughout the course of the night as well. Lots more from Dan to come as well. Ben, football and live Premier League action tonight in the Premier League?
Yeah, third place is back on offer for Arsenal tonight in the Premier League. The Gunners are away to Sheffield United, with the Blades having lost the last 3 in a row at home in the league. Alexander Lacazette, he's passed a late fitness test to be on the bench. There's one change for Arsenal. Joe Willock has come in for Danny Ceballos. For Sheffield United, Republic of Ireland striker David McGoldrick, he starts for the Blades, having missed the qualifiers against Georgia and Switzerland with a groin injury, as do Enda Stevens and John Egan. Meanwhile, Unai Emery says Mesut Ozil is ready to deliver for Arsenal despite not being in the starting 11 or on the bench tonight. The Arsenal boss said his attitude has improved, giving Ozil a better chance of playing in the future.
They were in front to him in that moment. But now I am feeling better with him every day in the training, and also he's another possibility more in the squad now to play and to help us.
It's a very weird measured decline of a player. Partially of his own hand and partially through management. I think it's through management? But like I say, I think it's a combination of things. It's a combination of factors. I don't think having President Erdogan as your best man at your wedding is probably a great PR move. No, that probably doesn't help you. But I've always had a certain amount of sympathy for him. I mean, the Erdogan thing isn't great, but even as a World Cup winner with Germany, he was still the subject of some fairly vicious abuse of a different nature as well. Yeah. And he's always been he hasn't been accepted in a lot of places. He's been an outsider in various places, throughout his career. I don't know, I think he's just one of these players that, I think it happens a lot more now, that lads just to get to a point where they have nothing more to give or achieve, and they just lose their focus, or they just drift
through the second half of their career.
Yeah.
You know, he's on a ludicrously good contract.
It's just bizarre that the drift is allowed to continue for so long. That's, I guess, my issue with it. But bad news, and further bad news, I guess, on the rugby front as well today, Ben.
Leinster have confirmed that Irish international Jack Conan will be out until the new year after he had surgery on his foot. The number 8, who picked up the injury during Ireland's World Cup campaign, is expected to be sidelined for up to 6 months. He's going to miss Leinster's entire Heineken Champions Cup pool campaign, as well as the 2020 Six Nations Championship. And Sean Cronin, who suffered a neck injury on World Cup duty, is being assessed by Leinster's medical staff. And the soul searching, meanwhile, is continuing with the Ireland team due back in Dublin tomorrow. Eyes have already looked towards the tournament in 4 years' time in France. Alan Quinlan has been speaking on OTB-AM.
So you don't need to make massive tweaks. I just think we need to find some of that young, energetic talent who can come in and reinvigorate the group again. And it's a rebuilding scenario. This is about building again for the next 4 years. It sounds like, you know, I think probably 2 years out, you just play. You don't play guys for the sake of it. You try and bring people in if they're good enough, and hopefully they can build up some experience. And you'd love to be going to the next World Cup in France with some experience, but with an age profile of 26, 27, 28-year-olds who are in their prime. And unfortunately, too many of our guys were in their prime a year ago.
Alan Quinlan there on OTB. Matt Williams had an interesting point. We were talking to him earlier, played the full thing out after 8 o'clock, just about Schmidt's holding on to older players, as Quinlan mentioned there, and the fact that he said a year ago that he was heading out the door, that mentally that plays a factor in how the players approach pretty much everything, like because they kind of think, well, this guy's not going to be here in 6, 7, 8 months' time.
Personally, for themselves, that can't be an excuse because it's a World Cup.
I'm not saying it's an excuse, but like it's something that burrows into your head, like that, you know, well, this guy's not going to be here in a year's time, and I kind of heard everything he has to say already.
You would expect, at being rugby professionals, that they would have a bit of self-respect, though.
It's hanging over them. Like, I mean, like, no one is in a position to preach, right? Like, the Football World Cup has gone.
I beg to differ.
The Football World Cup.
We're the media. That's what we're here for.
Sorry, well, that's actually what we do. But the Football World Cup is in Qatar. You know, like, nothing is perfect. Yeah. Like, I just find the Rugby World Cup a ridiculous competition. Like, it's a 4-year build-up now. Like, you know, what happens in 4 years' time? It's a 4-year build-up towards one game, basically. One quarter final.
Japan might beg to differ.
The draw takes place in what, 2 years?
Most people have qualified now by virtue of their performance.
So then you know already what group you're in and what your route is from a long way out. I just find it such a bizarre tournament, and I can understand why the pressure builds up on people, because you do actually have, like, in defence, like, you have this long build up to this. Like, there's no sort of sense of the tournament taking you in a particular direction. It's all very, like, predetermined what's going to happen. Like, maybe if they just lobbied for more teams to play, like, from Tier 2 to come up to Tier 1, then maybe being in the quarter-final might become an achievement rather than this, like, you know, it's the minimum that could be done.
It feels like a slog as well.
Where do the other teams go for the next 4 years now? Where did Japan go?
They'll go off and play Pacific Rim Rugby and stuff like that. It's fine.
But it does feel very drawn out as a tournament.
It is. Like
it's a horrible competition.
There's that line in The Simpsons where they go, the road to the Super Bowl is long and pointless. I mean, when you really think about it, and you're kind of going, the group phase is a bit much.
It's ludicrous. You're analysing games, trying to take some positives against the game against Russia, who, like,
they shouldn't even be there. They were there by default of defaults.
Like, you've 6 days to analyse it as well, as opposed to in the football.
Yeah, well, I can understand the physicality of that, but, like, it's trying to take some positives from a win against Gibraltar, basically.
Enough of your soccer crowd naysaying that.
But I'm just saying, maybe the competition is the problem, not just the Irish team.
That's a big thought.
Yeah.
Brexit text means I have to read this out. This is class. Lads have sent 2 letters to the IRFU demanding Joe Schmidt's resignation. One is unsigned, the other is explained that I don't really want him to leave. What do you think? Will it work? That's from Dave and Clonee. For that one, Dave. Lads, calm down with the rugby obituaries. They've dropped from world number 1 or 2 down to world number 5, not remotely comparable to the joke that is Irish soccer, whose greatest achievement is that they once got to a World Cup quarter-final.
But, like, isn't
that is sent from a high horse.
But 5th place, are they now in the bottom half of professional nations in the world? So that's the equivalent of around 70 in football.
We are in the second half of Tier 1 nations now at this stage,
Yeah, it's like the equivalent of 70 in football. Surely.
Sullivan and Kidney were hounded out of the same job as Joe Schmidt, says one text. hi lads, it's not rocket science to figure out where things went wrong for the Irish rugby team. This should be good. The Johnson-Sexton Conor Murray combination just hasn't functioned anywhere near the high level it was pre-2019, mostly down to injury, especially in Murray's case. Timing was also an issue, coupled with that few players coming towards the end of their careers. Keith Wood on the way at 7:30, and also we'll have Matt Williams after 8 o'clock as well, as we look to pick through the bones of Ireland's disappointing Rugby World Cup campaign. But back to events yesterday at Old Trafford, Ben.
Yeah, Liverpool hold a 6-point lead over Manchester City at the top of the Premier League after Adam Lallana's 85th minute equaliser earned them a draw against United at Old Trafford yesterday. Marcus Rashford had put United in front in the first half. VAR once again had an impact. Rashford's goal was given despite claims Divock Origi was kicked by Victor Lindelof at the start of the build-up to the goal, and Sadio Mane had a goal ruled out at the other end for handball. Liverpool boss Jurgen Klopp says United were set up to frustrate his players.
It's clear that it's easier for United in a situation like that, coming here, setting up 5-3-2 and really proper fight. Everybody's happy about that, and easy to excite the crowd. And we were not really there. We didn't get the momentum of the first half. They had it, we didn't get it. And at the end, we have to be happy with the point, clear, but we are not happy with the overall performance. But that's okay, that's sometimes like it is.
Not great news ancillary to that game as well, Ben.
Yeah, meanwhile, a Manchester United fan was ejected from Old Trafford during that game over alleged racial abuse. The club say they're investigating the incident as a priority, and the police have also been informed. Liverpool, meanwhile, released a statement saying they welcome the swiftness with which Man United launched the investigation.
On the pitch, bit of an odd one, in that United have become something of a bogey team for Jurgen Klopp, but not in the sense that they're a great tier one side, as we use rugby parlance, in that they're now operating in the same way like a Crystal Palace or a Stoke would have, where you sit in, defend and hope to pull off a point from them, which seems weird that that's where Manchester United are at, but that's the reality.
Yeah, it was a bit like a cup tie. It was a bit like, one of those cup tie situations.
Get them to a replay, see what happens.
And I actually just found the last 10 minutes of the game really interesting. Or Liverpool, 85 or whenever, when Liverpool equalised, that like once Liverpool scored, it was like they were just pushing to go on and win the game
away from home.
And it was like
Old Trafford.
That in many respects highlighted the difference between the sides. It was like they are the big team away to the smaller team who were under the cosh, and now they've scored and they're pushing for the other because this is where they should be and this is the natural law. And it is bizarre that what was a good result before the game ended up in some ways, for Manchester United, ended up in some ways the game, although they did well, it sort of asserted the difference between where the clubs actually stand at the moment.
It's basically stopping the opposition, stopping the better side from playing well.
As a Newcastle fan, I was reminded of myself watching United.
Wait, hold on, what?
Well, just yesterday.
You're a Newcastle fan?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's been tough the last couple of months, but it was kind of...
Months?
It reminded me...
I just want to space that out as a time frame.
Like when Newcastle beat Spurs and they beat United this season, it was kind of the feeling that United fans were having yesterday, that it's a great result, but nothing's fixed.
Yeah, I think it would be deceptive. I know there's like... He's getting a bit of praise for his tactics, and he approached the game quite well. But it was very much like, is that going to be effective when they need to actually start picking up points against the so-called sort of lesser team?
They have to raise their game.
They did a good job. They did a good job in the game, and they worked very hard. I saw Kev saying it was the best they'd seen them without the ball, and that's grand. But generally, they're meant to have Manchester United are expected to be effective with the ball. They
created so little. That's what struck me about United.
Yeah.
They were, like, as a creative force, very, very poor and very lacking. We'll get into it.
It's not a turning point. I don't think it's any suggestion that corner has been turned in any way at all.
The texts keep flowing on the rugby front. Maybe there's less criticism of the Irish rugby team because they've been more successful than their soccer counterparts. Also, one could argue that soccer has a bigger following. It definitely does have a bigger following. I don't think there's any arguing that. Come on, found out. This is one thrown at you, Ben. Implies spoofery. It should be thanks for the memories, Joe. That's from Mick in Finglas. And here's one saying, you lads are bigger bottlers than the rugby players. Afraid to call it what it is because you're so cosy with them. Let's face it, if they win things in years between World Cups and do nothing at the World Cups because countries with better players peak for World Cups, unlike others, I take no pleasure in it, but that's how it is. Says one texter.
Well, about the point there, we sort of very touched on that in his piece today, that certainly you have to look at, if the World Cup now is the be-all end-all and the measurement of it, then you have to look at your analysis throughout in the tournaments in between and go, well, hang on, You know, the use of players, like we always have this thing of punching above our weight a bit, but actually the IRFU, the control they have over their players is incredible compared to other neighbouring nations.
I think
it's a very privileged thing to have that control. And someone yesterday in the analysis, I don't know who it was, made a very good point that this was the level playing field. The build up to the World Cup, you don't have that advantage. Everyone has the same. I can't remember who it was that made that argument, but it was pointing out that the advantage that Ireland have during the Six Nations doesn't exist during the World Cup because all the international managers have their team for the same period of time,
or longer in the case of Japan,
or longer, whatever as it might be. And I don't know if that's true. People with rugby knowledge say that's rubbish or not. But it's interesting.
Matty pointed out as well, like without wanting to read the entire piece, he was saying that Ireland weren't thinking in a 4-year cycle or in terms of a World Cup cycle. Whereas all you heard in the wake of the defeat to Argentina 4 years ago was, oh well, that won't happen again. He's going to develop a whole new string of players, and that these are going to be ready for the 2019 World Cup. And turned out that they weren't.
They would have beaten
winning.
Argentina, though.
Ireland loves winning, you know, and there was that sense of the joy that was taken from wins in between, that maybe other nations were preparing for the bigger prize.
I don't know if it was Jerry's. I have to look back into it.
We're not great at long-term planning.
Somebody pointed out that for the IRFU, the Six Nations is still the show in town because it's the one that pays the bills and keeps the wolf from the door. So they need to make sure the Six Nations team, much like
I've seen that
Ireland is good, that they need to have the big houses, they need to make sure that everything's okay financially, and then without intending to do so, the World Cup almost becomes secondary, which is a bit of a worry. Keep those texts coming throughout the night. We're going to have Keith Wood up after 7:30. We'll also be speaking to Matty Williams. As I mentioned, we'd streamed that a little bit earlier on. And the Bows captain, Derek Pender, is going to join us on the show a couple of days after they secured European football. But the next Off the Ball Roadshow is right around the corner this Wednesday. That's the 23rd of October. We're going to be live in Cork. We're going to be in Crane Lane with British and Irish line David Wallace, former Ireland international Fiona Steed, ex-referee John Lacey, and it'll be a family affair as we're joined by 2 generations of the Myler family, David and his dad John. Tickets were sold out, so we've added a couple more. We found a few extra seats in Crane Lane, and you can be there too. Simply head to offtheball.com/events now to snap up the very last of those tickets. Brilliant lineup: David Wallace, John Lacey, Fiona Steed, and the Myler family in situ this Wednesday, Crane Lane in Cork. Ben, thank you for your service tonight as well, and my deepest commiserations on your Newcastle fandom. Dan is sticking with us throughout the night, and up next we got Keith Wood.
Off the Ball on News Talk.